Welcome to Star Wars Timeline. Today I'm reviewing the Courtship of Princess Leia. Let's find out if this early Legends novel is worth reading or if we should leave it in the past. Find out next. Where should I start reading? What is canon versus Legends? When does the story begin? The answers to these questions is right here on Star Wars Timeline. Alright guys, here we are. I actually haven't done a Star Wars book review in quite a while. This is when my channel actually started, and I decided, you know what, let me pause for a minute with like gameplay footage and character highlights and go back to a book which I wanted review for a very, very long time. I read it way back in late 90s, early 2000s, but you know, this book, as you will find out in this video, has left quite an impression. Whether it's a good impression or a bad one, let's keep watching and you guys will find out. Before I start talking about this book, let's situate ourselves and get the basics down. It's written by Dave Wolverton, and the cover artwork is done by Struzan. It's something that I always enjoy talking about when we discuss Star Wars Legends or canon books, is to highlight the artists, and of course, Struzan needs no introduction. He's one of the most popular Star Wars illustrators outside of course, the great Ralph McQuarrie. You will find his artwork on like Star Wars comic books and of course novels. He did all the Star Wars traditional movie posters, all the prequels in the original saga. Anyway, his name is a staple as far as Star Wars is concerned. This book was written in April 1st of 1994. Obviously, it's a Legends book, and it takes place 8 years after Battle of Yavin. For those of you guys who might be new and you don't have a clue or an idea how to, separate the two, suffice to say that all the content that was released after Disney acquired the franchise and started publishing new material in 2015, all of that is canon. This book here, obviously it's released in 1994, it's still part of early Legends novels. So that's where we're at, and it takes place 8 years after Battle of Yavin or after Episode 4, so that's where the storyline takes place. Now, full spoiler alert, guys. Before I give you my impression and opinion on this book, let me give you a rundown of what happens in the plot. Of course, I'm not going to go into every minute detail. Quite honestly, it's been a long while and I had to go back and reread the synopsis, but I have a good recollection of what the plot is. Let me give you the story first and then discuss what I liked about this book or disliked, the most. So here's the synopsis. We have Han Solo returning from his previous mission back to Coruscant, and he encounters a whole bunch of Star Destroyers and new ships in Coruscant's orbit, and they happen to be Happen Battle Dragons. And what happens is, as he lands on the planet, he meets back with Leia and all his friends. He finds out that there is this Happen Cluster delegation that comes to Coruscant, and they bring Leia amazing new gifts, which actually part of those gifts consists of 12 Star Destroyers that they bring. They also want to make a new alliance with the New Republic, and there is this new figure that enters the story, Prince Isolde, and he's son of the Happen Cluster leader, the monarch Ta'Chum. And what he does is he comes to the planet, he makes this offering, he wants to make a new political alliance, but he also makes a proposal to Leia. That's right, he wants to marry her because obviously he makes a lot of compliments, she's a great leader, and obviously it would be a strong political union that would make sense between the two peoples to strengthen their bond. Obviously, this leaves Han very, very jealous. It creates this love triangle, which I gotta say is one of the primary focuses of this book, the love triangle. So he's very jealous, he's very distraught, he doesn't know what to do with himself, and in his desperate attempt to try and win Leia's favor, he actually goes into Coruscant's, one of the cantinas, or, and he finds a sabak table, and he's kind of drinking, he's very disillusioned, he doesn't know what to do, and he enters this high-stakes sabak game in which, surprisingly, he wins a whole freaking planet, right? And the planet, of course, is no other than Dathomir. And he wants to present it as a gift to Leia. Now, for those of you guys who watch the Star Wars Clone Wars show, this is not to be confused with that version of Dathomir. Yes, it's one and the same planet, but when George Lucas reintroduced it in the Clone Wars television show, it became quite different. There's some things that parallel and mirror one another, but the presentation of this planet and its cultures are very different in the Clone Wars series, and I thought it's a very important distinction to make. Anyway, Han grabs this planet, right, and he wants to make it as an offering and say to Leia that, look, I got something too. I'm not just a smuggler and a swindler and a criminal who's running around the galaxy. You know, I fought in the rebellion, but I also have this material wealth to offer you. And in a funny scene, Han actually is being made aware of that the planet that he has won actually is within the territory of a rogue Imperial admiral called Zinj, which we also encounter in the X-Wing series. And basically, Prince Isolde, he makes fun of Han Solo. He says, look at you and all your manners. And the planet that you actually won, you've been lied to. Nobody owns this planet. It's under Imperial control. Prince Isolde also goes on mocking Millennium Falcon. Of course, all these different names that he could say, like it's an old hag of a ship, you know, and nobody would fly in it. Why don't you replace it with a new ship? And that's what Isolde does. Just to add the injury to the assault to the injury, he says, look, I'm going to offer you a battle cruiser as well. It's that you could have and fly around in. All you have to do is say no to Leia, and she will become my bride. So once again, it just infuriates Han Solo even further. And what he does next is pretty awesome and hilarious and quite unexpected. He kidnaps Leia aboard the Millennium Falcon. He kind of lures her in. He says, hey, you know, let's relax a little bit. You've been busy. It's an important decision for you to make. So him and Chewie, he lures her into the Millennium Falcon, and they escape. And they go to his newly acquired planet, right? They want to go to Dathomir. And in the meantime, Luke also returns to Coruscant from his mission, where Luke at this point in the Legend series is looking for the remnants of the Jedi Order. He's looking for any kind of lore or information that any planet could have to try to and rebuild the Jedi Order. So Luke comes back. He finds out what happens. He grabs Prince Isolde, and they have a support of Dragon Fleet from the Happen Cluster, and together they also go to Dathomir to try to bring Han Solo and talk sense into him. Like, look, what are you doing? This is Leia we're talking about. Upon their arrival to the Dathomir orbit, Luke and Isolde discover Zinj's Iron Fist fleet. He has an entire fleet surrounding this planet, and there's also an Imperial shipyard there. So there's quite an opposition, and you know they have to strategize their moves before they can have the upper hand and win. In the meantime, on the surface of the planet, Han Solo and Leia, they make a landing, and Han wants just to try and spend some time with her in this sort of kidnapping turned into a romantic environment, and say like, look, he tries to reveal his feelings to her to the full extent, even though we already see it in the Return of the Jedi. He wants to tell her that he wants to spend the rest of his life with her, and so on and so forth. And as they are trying to have their wild kind of vacation, they're being captured by the marooned Imperial garrison that Admiral Zinj had left years ago. Right, this Imperials, they grab Han and Leia, and in orbit, Isolde and his fleet are trying to make their plans. He says, look, there happened a fleet, you go back to Coruscant, and you try to bring reinforcements. In the meantime, Prince Isolde himself in his starfighter and Luke Skywalker in his X-Wing, they go in, right? They want to rescue their friends and, you know, and make sure they're safe. When they make a landing to the planet, Luke and Isolde find the remains of the spaceship, which was once a Jedi Praxium, right? It's called Chun Thor. And it's something that has been completely abandoned, and it's still intact because the access to it has been locked. But it has that particular Jedi lore and Jedi information that Luke has been always seeking out. And as they make their discoveries, they're being abducted, also captured and abducted by the locals, and they're called the Dathomiri Witches. And of course, it's an interchangeable name between a Clone Wars television show and this novel, where you could call them Night Sisters, but you could also call them Dathomiri Witches. So one of these witches, she intercepts them, and she brings them to her village. Zinj, in the meantime, he learns about Han's presence, that he has been captured by his garrison. He goes to this contacts the villagers of the Night Sisters, or Dathomir witches, and he says, I'm gonna make you an offer, right? If you bring me Han Solo and allow me to torture him and extract all the information I need from him, I will leave you alone, and more than that, I will give you an Imperial shuttle so you could all flee the planet and go about your business and, you know, forget about this place because it belongs to me. Or if you refuse, I'm going to use my space station, the part of the Iron Fist, you know, they have this satellite floating the planet, that he will freeze them to death over a slow, gradual period of time. He will freeze Dathomir until it becomes uninhibitable. Like, it will completely devastate the planet. Han and Leia, they actually break free, right? They steal the Falcon back, and the whole battle for Dathomir starts unfolding. Luke and Isildur on his side, Han and Leia on their side. And what Han is able to do, he goes into orbit, he starts battling the Admiral Zinj cruiser, and he allows a Millennium Falcon to be captured, right? And as it's being pulled by extractor beam, he goes through penetrates the shield, he goes and attacks the tower, and he destroys Zing. In the meantime, the Happen fleet returns with reinforcements from Dathomir, and they're able to attack the Imperial fleet and, you know, get the upper hand once again and win. At the end of the novel, of course, Han and Leia, they're reunited. Leia says no to Prince Isildur because she has feelings for Han, obviously, as well. And they actually get married, and that's what you see here on the cover. This is pretty much a hint of what's going to happen because two people are courting her. She ends up with Han. On Prince Isildur's side of the story, he also falls in love with an unlikely character who is actually Teninel Jo. She's one of the Night Sisters from the Singing Mountain clan of the Dathomir witches. He falls in love with her. He's very taken with her. And she becomes also one of the more important characters along with Prince Isildur because their offspring becomes also a prominent character later in Star Wars Legends books. Anyway, that's the synopsis. I hope I didn't butcher it. Again, I had to look a couple of notes on Wikipedia, but most of it also comes from my memory, especially when it comes to Dathomir and their adventures there. Now, let's get to the part where now I discuss what I liked, what was the most memorable thing about this book, and at the end of it, I'll give it my final score. So the first thing that I really, really remember enjoying, and it made such an impact on me that after all these years reading it, I still remember it vividly, is Prince Isildur, who is this regal persona, and, you know, he creates this very tense and very, I thought, interesting love triangle between Han, Leia, and himself, because what he has to offer to Leia is quite different from Han. She obviously loves Han, right? And we see they reveal their feelings to one another in Empire Strikes Back, and their relationship actually evolve in episode 6. But here enters this new character who makes a political move. He makes no illusions about, like, look, I love Leia all this time. He's a new guy, right? It wouldn't make any sense for him to quickly fall in love with her. He says, no, let's make a political alliance. I'm going to bring the wealth and the fleet from the Happen cluster, and it's going to make the Republic stronger. So he made a strong case there, which created the love triangle, which to me also was very believable. There's these two people that love one another, but there's this third party who says it's not just all about love, right? Because there's still Imperial remnant running in the galaxy, like this Admiral Zinj, and, you know, the Republic is constantly under the threat. And what he offers will make it stronger. What I also really enjoyed about Prince Isildur is the culture that he comes from, the hierarchy of the Happen cluster peoples, how they have this matriarchal society where women rule, right? And he is the son of the Queen Tachuma, and he actually has to follow her commands. We understand through the events of this novel, and actually in the future novels as well, like the New Jedi Order, when we learn more about these people, is that Prince Isildur, it wasn't really his plan exactly, or not to the full extent. That was actually his mother trying to manipulate him and pull the strings and say, I see this, you know, young royalty from Alderaan, Princess Leia, why don't we mix bloodlines there, and we could have our hands in the Republic as well. So there is some very interesting intrigues there, which I thought the writer did very successfully in a very believable way. So another thing that I also liked, which relates both to the Happen cluster, but also to Dathomir and Night Witch clans is the world building. Just from one novel, guys, I still have these fun and warm memories of the way that the Dathomir is first presented there, long before George Lucas tried to use it in the Clone Wars series. We see this very verdant planet with jungles all around, and the first scene where we encounter these Dathomir witches, and they have force abilities, which we find out through the events of the novel. Actually, is because of this fallen Jedi Praxium ship that also lands on this planet and further builds this beautiful, beautiful world building and lore of this planet. And there's so many discoveries to be made. After the novel is over, it gives this very clear picture of what the planet is, but it also leaves a lot of questions open. And of course, future books fill those gaps. But when I was reading, oh man, I want to learn how this Jedi ship / Praxium ended up there. How much Luke is going to learn about the Jedi Order, right? Because Luke still has a lot of questions. He wants to reinstate the Jedi Praxium and Jedi Academy, but he doesn't know fully how to go about it. He doesn't have any mentors or Yoda or Obi-Wan Kenobi ghosts popping out of nowhere, giving him precise instructions how to proceed. So the world building in the book was really, really strong. I would say one of the best of the Star Wars Legends books that I've read. Another thing that I really, really enjoyed about this book was a sense of adventure, romance, and humor. When you read this book, it almost feels like Indiana Jones franchise, which felt obviously was filmed in the 80s, but Steven Spielberg and George Lucas tried to pursue this very over-the-top, cheesy, swashbuckling Pulp Fiction era kind of storytelling. And for those of you guys who don't know Pulp Fiction, that's basically pre-comic books. In like 30s, late 20s and early 30s, there was this cheap magazines with beautiful covers, which kind of inspired comic books later on, and printed on this very cheap pulp paper that started these very cheesy stories, like just to name a few, Buck Rogers, which will also influence George Lucas to make his Star Wars movies. It was a television series, and before that, Buck Rogers was also a Pulp Fiction magazine. And that's what the novel feels like. It's not to say that it was overly cheesy, but it has that very innocent sense of adventure, right? And exploring this lush jungles of Dathomir and this swashbuckling hero, Prince Isolde, with who looks like a Adonis, with this blonde hair. He's like a Greek god. The way he's described in the book, you compare him to Han Solo. It's I don't know if Han Solo has a chance versus this guy. Because Leia, initially on the surface, she's very struck with him. He's a very, very handsome man. He's very intelligent. He has this regal way about him. And when Han shows not his best side, where he starts bickering a lot. He's like, oh, he's making fun of my ship. I'm gonna go fist fight this guy or something. Leia kind of compares the two. As a female, as a woman who has two suitors, she makes a comparison. She says, well, here's this really, really regal guy. So it was also very humorous on that behalf. Han's antics are amazing. Not only the author recaptures Harrison Ford's mannerisms to the letter. Leia, Han, and Luke are done perfectly in this book. It's the way you see him in the movies is also the way you experience them in this book. And the romance aspect of it was also good. At first, I was a little bit cautious. I was like, hold on a second. You're going to go back and explore Han and Leia's relationship when we kind of sort of can deduce where they're going to end up after episode 6. But he continues that thread. And he makes reasonable points of why they work together as a couple, why they should continue their lives together, and actually have family, and later on, as we find out, have offspring and have kids as well. So he makes a strong case why they connect. And last but not least is just the style in which this book was written. There's certain very magical and beautiful aura surrounding the 90s science fiction novels and fantasy. And it just honestly felt like Star Wars. I can't put a finger on it. If you read a lot of 90s science fiction and fantasy, you probably know what I'm talking about. It's just, I guess, an element of innocence. It's an element of not trying to constantly shock us. You know, we live in a culture of streaming services with like Netflix and Amazon, where each show tries to compete with the next one and up the ante with plot twists, you know, and the character dies over here and a huge revelation at the end of the season there. And literature sort of started adapting that storytelling model as well, which honestly becomes just grating. It's still a point where like, oh man, good storytelling does not always depend on plot twists and surprises. And that's what's cool about this novel here. Yes, there's still mystery, especially with the Chon Tor, right? The Jedi Praxium, that Luke wants to make these discoveries. But its delivery is completely different. It doesn't rely on like plot twist. Here's adrenaline rush here. It's just a very consistent and deliberate storytelling experience, which I miss, honestly. You know, some of the newer Star Wars novels actually manage to do that as well. They go back to the basics, something that the Mandalorian show is also doing. It doesn't depend just on plot twists and surprises here. It's just like, okay, here's the Mandalorian, here's Baby Yoda, Grogu, right? And they are going on their adventures. And that's what I think resonates with a lot of modern audience when you take the Star Wars and you bring it back to the basics. And once again, this is where the novel succeeds immensely. So, to give my final score to this book, as you have probably find out as well, obviously I'm being very biased because it's the type of Star Wars that I like. It's the type of story that I enjoy. And this is the book which introduced Dathomir to me. This is the book which showed me who the Witches of Dathomir were. And it's nothing that will ever replace that first experience. You know, when I started watching the Clone Wars, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe they're bringing Dathomir. And it was so vastly different from what I remember. It took me a moment to actually open my heart and embrace the new version of Dathomir, right? Because some elements are kind of similar. Some elements are very different. And you know, I had to keep an open mind and just accept the Clone Wars on the merit of just really powerful writing. Regardless how similar or different those two versions of Dathomir are, both I think are very, very strong in terms of storytelling. And what's interesting, when you go to a recent video game like Jedi Fallen Order, where its main protagonist, Cal Kestis, also travels to Dathomir, and you see the Night Sister of Dathomir, like Sister Merrin, like, oh my God, these guys are making, you know, they're paying attention. They actually were able to fuse a version of Dathomir from this particular book and fuse it with what George Lucas did later on. So the two kind of intertwine. I was like, wow, that's amazing. On those grounds of the type of storytelling that we have, which is very simplistic, the quality of the 90s kind of like science fiction novel, you know, skin on top, and the fact that we have Dathomiri witches here and the whole journey there, plus the love triangle between Luke, Leia, and Prince Isildur, this book gets a 4 out of 4 score from me. Once again, I'm pretty sure I'm biased, but a lot of fans that I talked to today in different forums, on Facebook groups, people are like, yeah, it's out of the Legends books that we have read, it's probably one of the strongest ones. So I think 4 out of 4 score is pretty fair. Anyway, guys, I would love to find out, for those of you who read this book or who are contemplating reading it, what are your thoughts? You know, let me know what was your impression of Prince Isildur. I would particularly love to find out what are your thoughts on the Night Sister clans and how they were portrayed in this book versus what we later get in the Clone Wars show. Once again, thanks so much for watching, guys. I really appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, you know, hitting that like and the bell button. Your support would really help me out a great deal. And I promise to come back and do more of these Legends and canon Star Wars book reviews. And I'll see you guys next time.